Hello, everyone. So great to have you here. Welcome to our interactive workshop on Skillful Climate Conversations, where our goal is to help you build your skills for lobbying in particularly difficult conversations. We're so glad you're here. My name is Tamara Station, and I co-founded the Portland, Oregon chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby in 2012 and moved into the role of Greater Pacific Northwest Regional Coordinator a few years later. I love being on staff in this latter role, and I'm also grateful to serve in the training department as CCL's Education and Resilience Coordinator.
And my name is John Sabin. I'm one of the Great Lakes Regional Coordinators. I became a CCL volunteer in 2016 and founded the Oberlin, Ohio chapter a few months later. I've also been a clinical social worker for over 30 years and have mostly worked as a psychotherapist, and that's where I first learned the skills of motivational interviewing, which we'll be talking about today. I want to thank Vince Schutt, who is a motivational interviewing trainer in Canada. He's worked extensively with our CCL volunteers there. He is the co-founder of the group Environmentum, an organization dedicated to teaching the skills of motivational interviewing to environmentalists. Vince led a 6-week course this summer for CCL, which I participated in along with a cohort of others. 4 of those in the group helped in the planning of this workshop, and we'd like to thank Esther Fick, Joy McQuarrie, Andra Plegavko, and Florida State Coordinator Lisa Ruckman for their support and feedback in the process of creating today's workshop. Thank you as well to both Appalachia Regional Coordinator John Clark and Lisa Ruckman for their tech and chat support today.
We are excited to explore this content with you today. I've been exploring some of these topics for over 20 years as a teacher and developmental coach, and we're eager to share some tools and ideas that may feel helpful in addressing some of the challenges that life and climate conversations present. But please know that we are offering you the taster menu today. Much of this content deserves far more than the time we have today, and we'll be sure to share some fantastic resources for additional exploration. We've integrated time for a quiet personal reflection in this workshop, as well as time in small group breakout rooms. We also have a variety of interactive questions for you to respond to in the chat and on screen if you're on video, and have made time to practice some of the skills and concepts that we'll be discussing. You'll need some paper and something to write with, and you may want to access a couple of links in another tab or on another device, just to give you a heads up about that. We have designed this workshop for you today so that you can acquire tools that enhance self-awareness, build personal resilience, and improve communication skills. To explore the deep benefits and key skills of motivational interviewing, practice integrating these tools into your life, and learn about opportunities for further discovery. We'll start with addressing the what, the why, and the how of skillful climate conversations, and then we'll move into a deeper discussion around neurobiology and the role that it plays in your roadmap to resilience. We'll then have some brief time for questions and a short 5-minute break, and then we'll dive into an exploration of motivational interviewing with a focus on the spirit of MI and reflective listening and affirmations. Another short time for questions and sharing of resources before we say our goodbyes at 3 o'clock Eastern. With the basic introductions and such behind us, I want to dive into our workshop in somewhat of a unique way. John is going to play about 1.5 minutes of a music clip, the credits of which are in the chat and the speaker notes of this slide deck. And I invite you to get into the groove to the extent that you're comfortable and follow my lead. I'll be standing while I lead us through some simple stretches. Feel free to stand, to sit, to adjust the volume to suit your preferences. And if it helps you relax or let loose a bit, feel free to turn off your video, though no obligation to do that. I will be happy to be with you on screen. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me in that. It's fun to see some of you getting into it. I love that. And I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Why do you think I started with music and a bit of movement? In some ways, it feels kind of risky to play a song or a genre that not everyone will like. And while I love it, moving around on Zoom is definitely not the norm. So no wrong answers here. Why do you think I started with music? Puts us in an emotional state, gets you out of your head where you worry, socially engages the brain. Check out the chat and all these awesome ideas that are flowing in. Blood flowing, yeah, I can barely breathe. Builds positive energy. Yes, if nothing else, it's for me to like get me up, right? Wakes people up, opening the mind. Many of us are tired. Movement is good. Yes, similar to what you've shared. Music stimulates us, primes a positive state, gets me psyched to present, helps us get back into our bodies. And perhaps most importantly, and the reason that I want to highlight, by turning on the limbic system, music helps us remember what we're learning by creating longer lasting and stickier connections between parts of our brain that we want to associate with each other. Movement, particularly mindful movement, can help us connect to, learn from, and lean on our bodies. Most of us tend to lead with and rely on our minds, but our body can tell us a lot, and it can help us get from an agitated state in a frustrating conversation to a calm place where we can more easily and skillfully direct the conversations. In a nutshell, music and movement represent a multitude of avenues for building personal resilience through tapping into our higher brain and calming our nervous system. When we are more resilient, we are more able to have skillful conversations more often, which can ultimately lead to moving us towards a livable world. And that might sound familiar to many of you. So let's explore that for a few minutes, this idea of skillful conversations and why it matters for us as committed climate advocates. I'd like to ask you to think for a moment and then share your perspective again in the chat. What words or phrases come to mind when you think about a skillful conversation? John just popped the question into the chat for you so you can take a moment to reflect and share. And once again, there are no wrong answers here. This is just a word association game that I'm inviting you to play. I say skillful conversation, and you say connection, listening first, feel listened to, active listening. I think you guys are a lot of CCL members here. Attuned to the level, open listening and speaking, understanding something, purpose, empathy, enjoyable, listening, good questions, 2 ears, 1 mouth, use that in proportion. Excellent, common ground, reflecting back what you hear. So similar to what you're sharing in the chat, I believe that a skillful conversation is a balanced conversation where there is space for everyone involved and each person is able to express themselves clearly, feel heard, and move the conversation along in a way that leaves everyone feeling fulfilled. Now I'd like to invite you to reflect for a moment about a skillful conversation that you've been a part of. And in just a moment, I'll invite you to write down some associations on your paper with your pen or pencil or whatever writing device you have. This skillful conversation may have been about climate, or it might have been about doing the dishes, or about a project at work, or potentially about even where to spend Thanksgiving. It may have been a conversation with a coworker, a partner, a sibling, a child, or even a group of friends. So reflect for a moment about this skillful conversation that you've been a part of, and on your paper, write down some words or phrases about the vibe of the conversation or how you felt. Was it more positive or negative, supportive or contradictory? Were people generally aware of and considerate of the other people, or more focused on what they needed or wanted? And I'm going to set my timer to give you 30 seconds of silence to reflect. Okay, so now that you've had a few moments and some time to tune into the deeper sense of skillful conversations, let's spend a few minutes considering why it's even worth the effort to have such conversations. It might be obvious, and I bet if I asked you to name some reasons, we'd see the chat light up. But From my perspective, there are so many reasons to have skillful conversations. But for us as committed climate advocates, or climateers, as I like to call us, I want to highlight two key reasons. Let's start with the most obvious reason. Skillful climate conversations help move us closer to effective climate action, to drastically cutting emissions, to passing carbon pricing legislation, to preserving our oceans, our forests, our fill-in-the-blank beautiful places in the world for our fill-in-the-blank important people and other creatures. Imagine a meeting with a really key player in the climate world, like maybe a lobby meeting or an endorser meeting, and they say something in complete opposition to our views, something that we see as completely ridiculous and unrealistic. And then they keep on going, and we begin to feel really upset, annoyed, incredulous, without the ability to stay relaxed, which allows us to think clearly in our prefrontal cortex. We could send the conversation off the rails and get nowhere close to discussing effective climate solutions, assuming we haven't checked out by that point and just gone silent. The second reason might not be as obvious, but I think it's similarly important. For most of us who don't live under a rock or in the middle of the Mojave, communication makes up about 70 to 80% of our waking hours, according to the University of Missouri and many other studies. That's a lot of time. I can imagine that for most of us in this workshop, the amount of time that we spend conversing about climate is also relatively high. If you had the choice between spending that time in skillful conversations with the ability to flex, think calmly, strategize, and feel connected to yourself and others in the conversation, or spend that time stressed out, overwhelmed, frustrated, confused, or at a loss for what to do, how to act, what would you say? Which would you choose? Yeah, too obvious to ask for participation on that one, right? Building our ability for skillful conversations makes life more enjoyable. When life is more enjoyable, in more moments, we are better able to savor our world in the process of doing our best to save it. So, how do we build these skills? I bet that's why you're here. Well, you've come to the right place. I think that common knowledge and societal norms, and even traditional CCL training, if I might say, would have us focus on the process. What are the steps that I need to focus on? What are the things that I need to make happen in order to build the skills that I want? There is great value in understanding what works and how to do these things that work, and knowing tricks and tips that make these processes easier. Also helpful is having a deeper insight into why various approaches work, which can help us be more creative and flexible in each moment. And while there is certainly a place for processes and step-by-step approaches, I also think it's important to turn the lens a bit and consider what is hard for me. Take a psychological selfie, in a sense, and notice, where am I inclined to give up? When does it feel easier for me to walk away than to stick with it despite my commitment? This is a huge part of building resilience and skillful conversations, noticing where your challenges lie and doing your best to work with them. There are all sorts of ideas in the world that can make things better, but if we recognize and accept that we might really struggle with the actual skill building part, because there are parts of us that are standing in our way, and building those skills will be much harder, if not impossible. Noticing when listening or compassionate communication is hard, and honing in on those aspects that make it hard, or what can make it less hard next time, and one day maybe even easy. And last in line, but with the biggest and boldest font, if you really want to improve your ability for skillful conversations, it's going to take practice. Practice noticing, practice building awareness, practice accepting, practice listening and talking and being. Practice with all of it. As Elizabeth A. Stanley says in her fantastic book, Widen the Window, rewiring the brain and body to improve our performance and build resilience requires an integrated training regimen and consistent practice over time. Just as muscle growth and improved cardiovascular functioning requires months of consistent physical exercise. The more you practice, the better you'll become. The better you become, the better you'll feel. And the better you feel, the more motivation you'll have to continue in this climate mitigation marathon. What we get to do now is to delve into the process of deepening our own resilience, of noticing and accepting and practicing how we can be more present and skillful in challenging climate conversations in our lives. I like to think of this process as developing our roadmap, helping each of us to get a better sense of what might be involved in our own journey. On my roadmap, there might be a mindfulness mile marker and a solid stretch for listening to really loud music, dancing, and being in the wilderness. On your roadmap, there might be more regular pit stops for long runs or yoga, or just beginning to notice habits and tendencies. That's the beauty of this process. It's your journey. And while it's highly likely that our maps will have overlapping features, each one of us is different and on different parts of the journey. Recognizing and accepting that and doing more to create opportunities for growth are the basic building blocks of personal resilience. The other thing that I want to highlight is this polarity of building our resilience while still remaining grounded in the reality of everyday life. Sometimes people think that building resilience needs to be an all or nothing thing. And some people think it's all about meditation and mindfulness, which may seem too woo-woo for their style. But in the words of Jay Michelson of 10% Happier, it's possible to be committed to meditation, mindfulness, transforming the self, upgrading the mind, but also have a consciousness that is very real world, practical, political, nuts and bolts. So let's explore some nuts and bolts of human consciousness as they relate to skillful climate conversations and conversations in general. I'd like to share a very brief overview, and for some of you, perhaps a reminder of how our nervous systems work as mammals. I find that having a visual framework gives me more agency over my behavior, helping me to fine-tune my response to challenges and build resilience over time. So in just a moment, I'm excited to explore with you a polyvagal chart adapted by Ruby Jo Walker, which helps visualize the polyvagal theory developed by Stephen Porges in 1994. So out of curiosity, show of hands, you can pop it in the chat if you want to. How many of you have heard of Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory? Anybody out there? I'm not seeing any hands on my screen, but I'm not seeing Iona. I see you. Awesome. It's wonderful to see all your faces too. How great. So the vagus nerve is one of the longest and complex of the 12 cranial nerves in our body, starting in the brain, connecting to the neck, the heart, the lungs, and the abdomen. Porges's extensive research with the vagus nerve expanded understanding about the role of the vagus nerve in emotional regulation, social connection, and fear response, specifically identifying a third type of nervous system that he calls the social engagement system. Why do we care about this third nervous system response as CCLers committed to skillful climate conversations? Because it's this system that allows us to build and sustain functioning, fulfilling relationships. It's from this place that we listen openly to those with different perspectives, because it's this part of the nervous system that breeds our curiosity and ability to truly connect. If we know ourselves well enough to understand what happens when and why, then it becomes easier to take actions that help us stay in and return to this place of calm and connection again and again. So what I want you to notice first about this chart are the three distinct sections. Starting at the bottom in green, social engagement zone, where we feel calm and safe, and moving towards the top, where our autonomic nervous systems have been aroused in the yellow fight or flight space and have ultimately slowed or shut down in the red freeze zone. At the bottom is the place where most of us yearn to be much of the time, the green social engagement system. When we're operating in that system, our nervous system is supporting us to feel calm, grounded, curious, settled, compassionate, and generally at peace. My hope is that most, if not all of you, are in that place right now. Unless, of course, you didn't get enough sleep last night, or you're super sick of being on Zoom, or I've just upset you by saying reconciliation. It's in this place that we are inspired to do things like supporting a cause that's meaningful to us, drawing or doing something creative, developing a skill or mastering something, or being there for a loved one. Above the social engagement system is the yellow fight or flight and lesser known find or fawn zone. As we become more stressed and our nervous system more aroused, detecting what it believes to be threats to our safety or well-being, we do things that we might think will help us return to that sense of safety. Things like appeasing others, seeking likes on social media, seeking quick wins or quick fixes like good online deals or ice cream or chocolate, or binge watching our favorite shows. When our coping strategies don't seem to be working, we might feel a deeper sense of anxiety, concern, fear, or panic in a more of a flight pattern, or perhaps more of a sense of irritation and frustration and panic or rage in what people refer to as the fight response. In this zone, we still have the sense that we can, that something can be done, that action can be taken, that success is possible. But the effort here, the presence of possibility and capability, isn't without its edge. It's not a calm place to hang out necessarily. In other words, but a lot of people get a lot of things done in this space, and many people tend to spend a lot of their time here, especially in challenging conversations. At some point, things become simply too much for our nervous system to handle, and it shuts down. Now in a place of I can't. This is generally a last resort thing. Unless you've experienced a decent amount of deep stress or trauma in your life, in which case your system likely has a tendency to shut down more quickly. In this freeze space, people often get a sense of helplessness, overwhelm, shame, depression, numbness, and maybe a sense of feeling trapped. You go from being over aroused through your sympathetic nervous system in that yellow zone to being under aroused through your parasympathetic nervous system. Para as in parachute, or parar, to stop in Spanish, or Madeline Para, who naturally helps us slow down and consider our actions. She's our president, for those of you who might not know that. So let's bring this closer to home a bit and explore our own experiences with stress in the yellow and red zones. You can give it some thought and then type your answers into the chat. I think John is going to open this for everybody. As you might imagine, so here's the prompt. How is your thinking impacted during high stress or challenging conversations? Your thinking. As you might imagine, what's happening during these high stress moments is that your brain is in the fight or flight or freeze state, and it can be hard to think or take in information. So go ahead and add your thoughts about your stressed out thinking in the chat. So cynical, hopelessness, thinking gets narrowed and rigid. Thinking? What thinking? Yes, it's much harder to find solutions, tunnel vision, frozen. I feel like I'm being attacked, withdraw, scattered. I lash out. I hear that. Geraldine, just react, usually not positively. Forget. Exactly. So you're great noticing here. I'm loving this. Your neural networks for empathy and connecting with people shut down. In a sense, they get drowned out or overshadowed by other brain functions that are being, in a sense, louder. And this is because the blood flow to the brain is reduced, and that impairs the function of your prefrontal cortex and your neocortex. That's your entire thinking brain. So let's do a quick activity to demonstrate this point. Some of you may know where I'm going with this. It's one of my faves. If you'd like to play along, hold up one of your hands and just make a fist with it, with your thumb on the inside. Imagine now that this is your brain, on drugs or not, whatever, doesn't really matter, okay? On the inside, where your thumb is, are the parts that tend to control the emotion and take over during stress, the inner brain called the limbic system. On the outside is your thinking brain, or the cortex and the neocortex. What often happens during high stress or even periods of chronic low-level stress, like being a climate advocate, is that we flip our lid. And while there isn't physically a disconnection between the inner and the outer brain during this time, there is a serious control issue happening where the inner brain is now in control for often, it can sometimes take about 20 minutes for you to come back down. So when your mind is being hyper vigilant from the amygdala in the inner thinking limbic brain, it tends to fixate on the negative and what can go wrong. Carbon pricing can't happen. This person will never change their minds. We're never going to be able to do this. And this impacts your ability to problem solve and be creative and see a bigger picture. There's this tunnel vision, like you guys said in the chat, that happens, which is caused by this fixation. And the parts of the brain that can be optimistic and see the outside are relatively shut down for a time. And as you can imagine, it would be helpful to know how and what to do to keep from flipping our lid, right? Particularly in conversations that matter, so that all the parts of your brain can work together in a more balanced way. And we will get there shortly, I promise. Now, let's talk about for a moment the emotional side of stress. So go ahead and share again in the chat. What emotions arise during stressful conversations or stressful moments? I think what a lot of us fear during these moments is that we're not going to make it somehow, or that we might let others down, or that our worst fears might come true, and how that's going to impact everything. So fear, anger, panic, sadness, rage, extreme regression, tears, despair, anger, shutdown, anxiety, fear and loss of self-esteem, feeling alive, I even saw, need to keep control of emotions, unworthiness, depression, guilt. Join our allies, depression, nervousness, fear of embarrassment, discomfort, upset. Yeah, all of that, right? And we also might fear being overwhelmed, like some of you said, that we can't manage it all, that fear and anxiousness is also compounded by feeling alone and disconnected, that there's nowhere we can go for help sometimes, or that we have to deal with this all alone. What's happening in the brain is that threat detection system is keeping all of our stress hormones elevated, like cortisol and adrenaline. And this leads to extended hypervigilance, irritability, and withdrawal. And our body can't really sustain all these things at once and struggles to return to a stable sense of emotional safety and security. Our mental and emotional response to stress are a huge part of our reactions, but there's an even a bigger aspect that we need to look at so we can fully understand the bigger picture and become truly skilled communicators. So when you're experiencing great stress, what does your body feel? This question can be hard for many of us to answer. So let me prompt you a bit. Our brain does this magical thing where it recreates our experience in part when we think about things. So visualizing details about a stressful situation can help your body remember and even feel in present time what you might have felt in the past. Maybe you felt stressed in or by a conversation with someone who disagrees with you about politics or climate action or vaccines or mask wearing. Or maybe this was a challenging interaction you had with someone at work, your colleague or a boss. Maybe it was your experience of reconciliation fatigue or a conversation with your partner. So let's see, I see lots of stuff coming in. Holding my breath, scared, shallow breathing, frozen, tense, disassociate, unable to breathe, heart rate up, poor posture, heart in my throat, tight, tense, paralyzed. Yeah, so a lot more rigidity, tense muscles, panic, exhausted, tight, butterflies in the stomach, sweaty palms. Your input is right on. I mean, it's your body, right? So of course it's right on. To walk through the general patterns, people feel tension and restlessness and they can't relax or sleep. And up until a point, that is. In this stressed out yellow fight or flight space, blood is being directed away from your organs in order to use your muscular structure to flee or fight. And your parasympathetic nervous system, which governs the rest and digest functions, sort of turns off temporarily. So with this personal exploration at our fingertips, literally, let's take a look at our autonomic nervous system and get a better understanding of how our neurobiology impacts our way of being in challenging conversations. So direct your attention to the image on the right by John Chitty of the Colorado School of Energy Studies, which is freely available at energyschool.com and in the speaker notes and in the resource list that we'll share at the end. This image of the body highlights the key parts of the autonomic nervous system that we've been discussing today. What I love is how it correlates to the polyvagal chart on the left and responses that we've been discussing about your life experiences during stress in particular. Like the chart, there are 3 unique circuits, red, gold, and blue, which correlates to the red, yellow, and green zones of the polyvagal chart. Notice first the red freeze network, the one that kicks in when we're in crisis and shutting down. The one where some of those thoughts, emotions, and physical responses live that you recently shared in the chat. This is also known as one of the brake pedals of the parasympathetic nervous system and has been identified by Stephen Porges as the dorsal vagal complex. It helps me to think of a dorsal fin on a dolphin because it's the one at the top, just like the red zone. The fight or flight middle section of the chart, also known as the parasympathetic nervous system, is mapped in gold in this image. This is the system that speeds things up like a gas pedal and gets us ready for intense action of some sort. It's the place that, without practice and intention, many of us might be in those truly stressful conversations. And the green on our chart is represented in the blue neural circuitry on the body diagram. This is what Stephen Porges identified as the ventral vagal system, or the other brake pedal of the parasympathetic nervous system. It's social engagement system, or the social nervous system, as it's also called, and creates the type of slowing down that most of us enjoy, where we feel relaxed, curious, and open to possibility. So while all those names and details are interesting, here's where it gets truly fascinating for us as committed climate advocates. Notice how the red freeze system innervates some of our face, though not very deeply, moves down, around, and into our heart and lungs, and further down into our internal organs like our stomach and intestines. When we're really stressed, we have all sorts of physical responses like decreased heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, and most interestingly for our work, a decreased ability to attune to the human voice or be as expressive with our facial expressions and voice tone. Think about your most stressed out moments in conversations, like when fully checked out or despondent. How expressive are you with your face and voice? Most of us tend towards pretty flat voice tones and facial expressions when we're feeling really, truly helpless or shut down. You can surely imagine the impact of this in a climate conversation. Notice that the yellow flight or fight network also spreads throughout the body from the base of the brain to the base of our torso into our organs, but not quite as deeply. Like you shared, this system clearly impacts our physical experience as well, but in more of a go state. We get increases in blood pressure, heart rate, adrenaline, dilation of the pupils, all so we can function better with our larger muscular structure as we're fighting or flighting. You might also notice on this list is an increase in defensive responses and dilation of bronchi. In a conversation, this would translate to negative tone and louder volume, two aspects which also tend to negatively impact conversations. And in the social engagement system, notice the distinct difference in how deeply this blue part of the nervous system moves into the face and the lungs and the back of the neck, directly impacting nuances in our facial expressions, voice tones, movement in the eyes, and our ability to relate and connect. Essentially, in this system, everything is working for us as it's designed to help us engage socially, and our defenses can relax. Clearly, this is a good place to be for our climate conversations, not to mention the rest of our time living on this beautiful blue orb. Now that we've explored in general how the nervous system works and the impact that it has on our lives and our conversations at various states, I'd like to give you a bit more time to explore your own nervous system and help you create a personal roadmap to resilience to deepen your ability to recognize and offer yourself what you need when you need it. By doing this, not only will you find more strategies to get back to green more easily, but you may actually be able to widen your window of tolerance, as Dr. Dan Siegel calls it, to make your green zone bigger so that you can actually stay in it more often. I've created 2 worksheets for you to use today and for reference in the future. I'll walk you through the example I created on the left, and then you'll have a couple of minutes in silence to develop your own roadmap from the template on the right, and then about 8 to 10 minutes in breakout rooms to flesh it out further. John will share both template links in the chat as well. So let's start in the grounded green, where we're most mindful and conscious. And I invite you to explore what it's like to be you and how the world appears in each zone. When I'm in the grounded green zone, I am hopeful and excited, among other things, and the world is my playground. Not always, of course, but that's what comes to mind when I envision myself there. There are things that naturally bump me out of this zone of resilience: lacking trust, reading a ton of bad news, fighting with my family or friends, feeling overwhelmed or helpless, to name a few. And there are those things on the right-hand side that help me widen my window of tolerance, like getting regular exercise, listening to my body, allowing myself to make mistakes, and staying connected to friends and family, and gratitude. Doing these things over many years' time has made it easier for me to have regular conversations with my dad, who has distinctly different views about politics, climate change, and COVID vaccines. I can now laugh during our conversations, literally, and truly say that I enjoy these conversations, but it was not always like that. I used to live on the edge of the fight or flight zone in these conversations with my dad, often feeling angry and irritable. The world and my dad felt supremely annoying. Recognizing patterns in ourselves like this helps us notice when we're no longer grounded in green. This can remind us to employ strategies for moving back into the social engagement zone. There are a variety of things that I can do to build resilience and calm my nervous system, things that help me feel safe and secure and connected and alive. As you can imagine, there are things that will make sense to do in the midst of a challenge or conversation, like those ideas on the left column, getting curious or compassionate, or shifting my focus. And there are those things that we might want to do as more ongoing regular practices, like those on the right. I love getting active in nature, dancing to really loud 90s tunes, or just watching the grass grow for a few. Naturally, some practices can be used in the moment or long term, like mindful or intentional breathing, which is shockingly effective and supremely discreet. Take 4-6-8 breathing, for example. It's so easy that we can practice it right now, in fact. So here's how it works. If you'd like to play along or breathe along, you breathe in for 4, you hold for 6, and then you breathe out to the count of 8. And this process, specifically longer out breaths, activates our parasympathetic nervous system that helps us get back to green. There are numerous benefits to holding your breath as well. So I invite you to try it with me if you'd like. I will count aloud for 1 round, and then I'll count silently to the best of my ability with my fingers on the screen, if it's helpful to follow along while you count in your head. And then I'll leave enough silence for anybody who would like to continue a couple more rounds to do that with me. Okay, so here we go. In for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In for, hold, out, out, in for 1, hold, out. Once you get into your own rhythm and find the timing that works for you, you can use this practice at any time to help you calm your nervous system. You might notice that my speaking slowed way down. So obviously that breath practice was really good for me too. So let's look briefly at the red zone, as much as I want to hang out and talk about the green zone, before I turn you loose with your own roadmap. Many of us won't actually spend much conversation time in this mostly mindless and unconscious red-free zone, though it may be a place that many of us recognize quite well after years of eco-grief and lifetimes of deep worries or hard challenges. It might also be a place we get bumped into after a challenging conversation, as used to happen to me quite often in conversations with my dad. For me, I feel pretty helpless, overwhelmed, and shut down in this dorsal vagal zone, and the world is too much. To soothe my nervous system here, it tends to work best to match the energy of this more immobilized state, like lying on a heating pad, naming emotions you feel or colors that you see in the room, doing a guided meditation, crying with a friend or alone, or noticing the feeling of your hands and your feet and your body. These things are often an easier transition to becoming grounded again than trying to do high energy activities like dancing or running or singing. It's really hard for me to go on a run from the red zone. So now it's your turn to develop your own roadmap to resilience. On the screen, you'll see an example of the roadmap on the left and the blank template on the right, which you can use to guide your process. John will also add both links to the chat again if you prefer to open and make a copy to write in online. Otherwise, you can just print them out later or take a screenshot right now because you'll be using those in your breakout rooms. You might use the blank one to start from scratch with your ideas, or you can choose my example to just replace practices that don't resonate for you if and when you choose to use this online. So there's a lot here. I get that. It's hard for me to hold back, and but the goal is not completion here. The goal is exploration of your own process and ideas. So I'll set the timer for 2 minutes and we'll ring you back when 2 minutes is up so that you can discuss and listen and continue fleshing out your roadmap in small groups. Okay, so go ahead and just, again, be with these for 2 minutes and I will chime you back. Okay, I know that wasn't very long, but that's why we're giving you more time in breakout rooms. So I'd like to offer you about 10 minutes, about 8 to 10 minutes in breakout rooms. If you'd like, you can use this time to discuss and explore how you feel and how the world seems in each zone. You could also explore various triggers and practices that resonate for you in various zones. And if it's helpful, the person with the birthday closest to today can start things off, if that's helpful. It may be helpful to have one or both of the worksheets open. So we suggest taking a screenshot right now before we go to breakout rooms, if you have that capability, or you could open the links in the chat in a new window or a tab on your smart device. If you're having trouble or have any questions, just let us know once we send you to breakout rooms and we'll do our best to help. You can return to this space or call us to your room. And worst case, don't let the tech overwhelm you. Just rely on good old-fashioned paper and pencil and mouth and ears to have a good breakout room experience. There are no wrong answers here. So John is going to send you to breakout rooms and we'll be bringing you back in 8 minutes. Have a wonderful time and we will see you back here shortly. I think that's all the time in this section that we have for questions, but we are going to have another Q&A at the end of the motivational interviewing section where we are happy to give you time to answer any questions that you have. But we've all been sitting in front of the screen for an hour and experts say that's not so healthy. So we're going to give you a break, 5 minutes, do whatever you need to do, a bio break. We are going to come back literally in 5 minutes. So, and John will start. So come back and hear John at 11:07 on my computer, maybe 11:08 if my clock turns. So have a wonderful break. We'll see you back here shortly.
So welcome back, everybody. Tamara, thank you for what you presented. I love your material. It's so wonderful. Let's dive into motivational interviewing now. Motivational interviewing was developed by a couple of psychologists, William Miller and Stephen Rolnick, in the early 1990s. MI emerged as a clinical tool in the treatment of addiction that has since been shown to be effective in a wide variety of healthcare settings. It is particularly helpful where there is resistance to change, either a change in behavior or a change in understanding. CCL is pioneering efforts to make use of MI techniques in the realm of political activism. There are specific techniques we'll be talking about today, but first we want to talk about how MI, in order to be effective, needs to be grounded in the social engagement zone that Tamara was just teaching us about. Well, let's talk for a moment about this phrase, motivational interviewing. When we think of interviewing, we usually think of maybe a TV reporter interviewing some politician or celebrity. But the word interviewing literally suggests two people viewing or looking at something together, interviewing. Miller and Rolnick said the attitude we should have when practicing MI is like sitting on a couch with someone looking at a family photo album together. This is motivational interviewing because this photo album we're looking at is full of pictures of the other person's motivations, their values, their goals, and their desires. And that's what we aim to look at together while we sit comfortably on a couch with this other person. Now in MI, we talk about a specific band of emotions, which represents the mental and emotional state we should be in to practice MI effectively. This attitude includes being curious about the other person's point of view, compassionate, which means we develop awareness of what is painful for the other person? What is difficult for them? We aim to be collaborative, working together with the other person. And we're non-judgmental. We want the other person to feel safe sharing their thoughts and feelings and ideas with us. And that can only happen if we are non-judgmental. And instead of pushing our own agenda, we are other-focused. We want to know what the other person values and believes that may direct them towards climate action. In teaching this material, Vince Schutt likes to say, oxytocin, not adrenaline. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone, the hormone active in our system when we are with someone we love or care about or feel connected to. And adrenaline is the hormone of fight or flight. Notice how closely the qualities of this MI band of emotions matches the qualities Tamara was just describing as the green zone, the social engagement zone. This is why we decided to begin today with Tamara's resilience work, because finding that green zone is critical to our success in using motivational interviewing. In some ways, being in the green zone is more important than the techniques that we'll be reviewing. I'm politically liberal, and I have a conservative friend with whom I disagree on just about everything. Yet, we remain friends, and we enjoy discussing all the things we disagree about. Recently, I made a deliberate effort to apply motivational interviewing skills to one of our conversations, and I found myself getting angry and frustrated with my friend. And I thought, something's wrong here. So I kind of let go of the techniques and just shifted back towards a friendly feeling. And then the conversation started to move in a more positive way again. From the perspective of being friends, we're able to discuss all sorts of difficult things. So as we learn the techniques of MI, we need to remember to hold them lightly as we stay grounded in the social engagement zone, where we and the person we're talking to both feel safe and at ease. We also talk about the spirit of motivational interviewing. This entails seeing the other person as a partner, not an adversary. You can see that the two people in this picture are dancing, not fighting. We want to have an attitude of acceptance. These people are quite different from each other. One is tall, the other is short. If they're going to dance together well, they need to understand and accept their differences. We need to bring an attitude of compassion, which means, as I said previously, having awareness and sensitivity to what the other person finds difficult or painful. And this is an evocative approach, a Socratic approach. We're not trying to cram our understanding into the other person's head. That doesn't really work. We're trying to evoke the other person's wisdom that will lead them to embrace climate action. It is possible for us to do this because all people, unless they are actually psychopathic, want a habitable planet for themselves and their children and descendants. We all want this. So we simply aim to tap into that desire in the other person and help them articulate their own vision for how this can be accomplished. Partnership, acceptance, compassion, evocation spells PACE. It's not important that you remember this acronym, but it is important that you remember the feeling of this. As Tamara said to me once when we were discussing this material, we have to pace ourselves in this work because we can only move at the speed of trust. So having established the importance of staying in the green zone, let's turn to the central technique of motivational interviewing, which is reflective listening. We can remember the elements of reflective listening through the acronym OARS, O-A-R-S, which stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. We'll take these one at a time. Open-ended questions are questions that cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. They typically begin with words like how, what, when, where, why, who. I forgot to put which on this slide. Most of these words start with the letter W. These questions, these open-ended questions, open the door. to the other person's way of thinking and feeling, and they are critical to the process of evoking the other person's wisdom. This is the difference between, do you support carbon pricing, yes or no? And what do you think of carbon pricing? The first question brings the conversation to a stopping point, but the second one opens the door to further exploration. Sometimes in our lobby meetings, we will ask yes or no questions. There is a time and place for asking, when this bill comes to the floor, will you vote for it? But the heart of a lobby meeting or other climate conversation should incorporate mostly open-ended questions to keep the conversation flowing and to allow you to learn about the other person's way of thinking. CCL has been pretty good about encouraging open-ended questions. We even count the number of these in our lobby meetings. Unfortunately, I think some people have gotten the idea that there's nothing more to motivational interviewing beyond open-ended questions, and there is more. Moving ahead to affirmations. In a healthcare setting where MI first developed, affirmations are used to encourage the other person to develop confidence that they can overcome their addiction or stick to their medication regimen or whatever it may be. In our climate conversations, we can use affirmations to affirm the other person's values, their strengths, priorities, and maybe especially points of common ground. We are using affirmations to diffuse any sense that this is an adversarial relationship. The journalist Amanda Ripley once spoke to CCL on a national call, and I remember her saying, you have to affirm the goodness of the other person. This is critical. In my conversations with my conservative friend, he recently said to me that he thought that talking about racism itself is divisive. I don't agree with him, and we had some back and forth, each sharing our opinions. Finally, it occurred to me that we had a common value, and I said to him, I notice that you value unity and you don't appreciate divisiveness. Although we understand these things a little differently, we do have a common value here. This kind of statement can lower the heat in a conversation and bring two people together back into the green zone. Reflections. Reflections are the heart of reflective listening and motivational interviewing. If we just ask a series of questions, even if they're open-ended questions, all we're doing is conducting an interrogation. But when we reflect back to the other person what we've heard them say, we let them know that we have understood them, that we are listening, and that we are not judging them. Offering a reflection also slows down the conversation. Instead of responding to what someone else says with the rebuttal, which might be our first instinct, we respond by reflecting what we've heard and giving the other person an opportunity to elaborate or correct our understanding. This keeps the focus on what the other person thinks, which is deeply respectful of them. I want to quote Amanda Ripley again, this time from her book, High Conflict. She writes, when people don't feel heard, they get slightly anxious and defensive. They say less, and whatever they do say tends to be oversimplified. The walls go up. This is the yellow zone that Tamara talked about, fight or flight. But when people do feel heard, magical things happen. They make more coherent and intriguing points. They acknowledge their own inconsistencies willingly. They become more flexible. Now, there are different types of reflections. We can reflect the surface content of what the other person has just said. This might be a simple repetition of a phrase or a sentence that the other person has spoken. We can also reflect unspoken meanings, things that they've implied, or emotions we can guess are underlying what they've said. And there are double-sided reflections, which reflect two sides of an ambivalent attitude. I'll give examples of all of these in a moment. Let me say now that in motivational interviewing, reflections are offered as statements instead of questions. Now, there isn't anything wrong with saying, what I hear you saying is X. Is that right? You know, that's a clarifying question, and that's fine. It has its place. But in MI, we emphasize offering reflections as a simple statement, allowing the other person to confirm our understanding or to help us understand more clearly. We aim to use accurate empathy, in which our reflection so accurately reflects the other person's point of view that they say, yes, that's exactly right. If we don't get that reaction, that's okay, because the other person will say, no, that's not exactly what I meant. And they will elaborate in a way to help us understand. So let's look at examples of these different types of reflections. Here is a public statement from a member of Congress in 2020. I support common sense measures to protect our environment. We must consider the potential dangers to our economy that new regulations impose. Now, if we want to just reflect the surface content of this statement, we might say something like, regulations can endanger the economy. This is just repeating some of the words the other person used. If we want to reflect an implied meaning, we might go for something like, big government can make things worse. This is reflecting a larger principle or belief that we surmise is underlying the original statement. To reflect an emotion that might be underlying the statement, we could try something like, you're afraid of harming people's livelihoods for the sake of helping the environment. Notice also here the shift from the rather impersonal phrase, the economy, to the warmer and more personal phrase, people's livelihoods. Basically, this means the same thing, but by shifting the language, in the reflection, we can deepen and enrich the conversation. Double-sided reflections are very important in motivational interviewing because MI developed to help addicts resolve ambivalence regarding sobriety. On the one hand, the addict wants to pull their life together, have a stable family and a stable job, but on the other hand, there is a pull towards that addiction. A method that MI developed to help resolve this kind of ambivalence is to simply reflect back both sides of the ambivalence. By acknowledging the pull of addiction, the MI practitioner creates a space for the addict to acknowledge they also have a desire to become clean and sober. In our case, in this case, by acknowledging the member of Congress's desire to protect the economy, we create space for them to also affirm their desire to protect the environment. Both of these are true. Notice in this example, in a way, it's still a surface level reflection because it's just using the words that the speaker used. So we can actually go a little deeper than this. We could say, you want to protect people's livelihoods and also the natural world on which all of our livelihoods depend. Notice how the meaning has not strayed too far from the original meaning, but there is a twist, a new element. In the original statement, the economy and the environment were described as competing values, and we kind of have to choose one. In the reflection, people's livelihoods and the natural world are described as being essentially one and the same. Now, this reflection could be too much of a reach. You have to use your judgment. Do you think the other person will say, yes, that's exactly right to this reflection? If you don't think so, you probably shouldn't try it. But if you could use this reflection and gain affirmation from the other person, you would have succeeded in establishing a link between the economy and the environment much more effectively than if you'd simply made a rebuttal like, oh no, that's a false dichotomy between the economy and the environment. I think it's hard to come up with a deep reflection like this without a lot of practice. And frankly, I had a lot of time to think about the examples I would present today. I didn't have to come up with this on the fly in the middle of a conversation, and I don't know that I could have. But you don't have to do it either. You know your members of Congress, and you know your friends and family members that you have regular climate conversations with. You can think about what they've said, and you can plan reflections ahead of time. Just as we plan open-ended questions before lobby meetings, we can anticipate statements that we might hear, and we can plan reflections to those statements. Finally, we have summaries. A summary is a review of the whole conversation or a big chunk of the conversation as you understand it. It's kind of like a big reflection. A summary is important at the end of a lobby meeting. It establishes that you have heard your member of Congress or the staffer clearly, and you have a common understanding as your meeting comes to an end. When you have your next lobby meeting, it's good to begin with a summary of the last one. This gives your meetings a sense of continuity. Let's put these elements together. When we practice reflective listening, the emphasis should be on reflecting. To accomplish this, aim to offer 2 reflections or affirmations for every open-ended question you ask. So the pattern might be that you ask a question, the person answers, you offer a reflection, they elaborate, you offer another reflection or maybe an affirmation of a value, and then they elaborate further. At this point, you might ask another question. This puts you largely in the position of respectfully listening and doing your best to understand the other person non-judgmentally, helping them to feel safe to share more of themselves with you. Now, when you're talking to another person, both you and the other person are shaping the direction of the conversation in the choices you make in every moment. We can be thoughtful and deliberate in how we do this. In motivational interviewing, we use reflective listening to elicit, encourage, and emphasize what I'm going to call solutions talk. In the healthcare field, MI uses the term change talk. And the idea is that talking about change precedes implementing change. In our climate advocacy work, we can say that talking about climate solutions precedes implementing them. So one of our goals in these conversations is to steer them towards solutions. If the other person is discussing solutions with you, even if you don't like their solutions, you know the conversation is on the right track. This is part of the wisdom of CCL. We don't emphasize discussing climate science with those who are skeptical of the science. Behind that skepticism, we often find fear of certain solutions like global socialism. If we can engage a skeptical person in a conversation about solutions that they like, we may find that their skepticism about the science simply ceases to be an issue. Let's do some practice. On the slide, you'll see a statement made by a left-wing friend of mine. I don't support a carbon tax. We need to get away from capitalist domination and support things like Medicare for all, free education, more affordable housing, all the people over profit issues. That could include nationalization of the fossil fuel industry and keeping fossil fuels in the ground. What I'd like you to do now is to put in a chat an open-ended question you might ask in response to this statement. Okay, so we're getting some answers coming in now. What do you mean by capitalist domination? What concerns you about a carbon tax? Why do you disapprove of a carbon tax? How do you feel this could realistically happen in the current political climate? I think these are fabulous. These are great open-ended questions. So what about affirmations? Can you put in the chat an affirmation that you might make to this person? Maybe a value that you sense that they have, something that you might have in common with them. What kind of affirmation could you make of this person? You care about the welfare of regular people. I love your obvious concern for those in dire straits. Wow, you are a big thinker. You are most concerned about taking care of people. These are beautiful. But you can see how if you were in a challenging conversation with this person, these sorts of affirmations will kind of lower the temperature and bring both of you back into the green zone. And now maybe this is the most challenging, but I'd like you to try in one sentence to put in the chat a reflection that you could offer this person. It could be just a surface content reflection, maybe an implied meaning or an underlying emotion that you're picking up. Or if you want to try something fancy, try a double-sided reflection. You want to cut carbon emissions and you care deeply about people's lives. You are open to many solutions. I hear that you're looking for solutions that protect all aspects of people's lives. You're looking for a fundamental transformation of our economy. These are really great. And you can see, there's a sort of like, at least in the work that we're doing, I think there's sort of a blurry line between an affirmation and a reflection because we're reflecting the values that we hear back from the other person in an affirmation. All right, let's do some more practice. As Tamara said in her section, practice is essential to learning these skills. So here is another quote. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong quote. This statement here was contributed by CCL volunteer Andra Plagavko, and from a conversation that she was part of. And she heard someone say, there are problems with making sure people have enough fresh water. We should spend money on that, not on trying to regulate the climate. The climate has always been changing. Liberals are using the weather as an excuse to usher in global socialism. Can you again put in the chat an open-ended question that you might ask in response to this statement? What do you think is causing the lack of water resources? That's a great question. Again, why are we having water shortages? Wonderful. How could climate regulation solve problems with water? Your answers are coming in so fast, they're hard to keep up with. What solutions do you favor for helping secure clean water for all? These are wonderful. Let's try affirmations. Can you put in the chat an affirmation that you can make of this person? A value that they have? Common ground that you have with them? What could you affirm about the person who made this statement? It's clear that you care about the finite water supply. I hear that you deeply care about people. You're passionate about securing basic needs for all. These are wonderful. And now again, let's try a reflection. One sentence could be surface content, an implied meaning, an underlying emotion, or a double-sided reflection if you'd like to try that, and put that in the chat. I can see that you care about making sure people have access to fresh, potable water, and you're aware of how the climate has changed in the past. Very nice, double-sided reflection. You want to support people's needs while maintaining our free market system. Excellent. It seems like you feel concerns about climate change are really a cover for a political agenda. Beautiful. You folks are good at this. I hear that you're concerned with helping the water issue without harming the economy. Okay, wonderful. Let's do one more practice session. Here's one more quote. John, if you could begin setting up breakout rooms. This statement is from a public statement made by a member of Congress in 2019. And he said, today's hearing is entitled Leadership to Combat Climate Change, certainly a worthy objective. The Green New Deal would be devastating to people who live in West Virginia or Kentucky, hardworking miners. I think it would be devastating to middle-class workers all across this great country. We're going to send you into breakout rooms to discuss this quote, which we will put into the chat for you. So John, if you would put that quote into the chat. We would like you to meet with some of your fellow climate activists here and come up with an open-ended question, an affirmation, and a reflection. Also, talk to each other about any things that you're wondering about, questions that you may have, because we're going to have some time for Q&A here shortly. Looks like maybe everybody's back. Is that right? So hope you had a good experience discussing this with a few other CCLers. Who would like to share, some of the things that you came up with? You can raise your hand by clicking on the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen, and then raise your hand electronically. And John will ask you to unmute.
We struggled for a little while, and then we came up with as open as we could get, which was how would the Green New Deal affect climate change?
Okay.
because we didn't want to like shut people down at the beginning.
Okay. All right. Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Somebody else?
Dennis?
I got something good, I feel, from one of the people in my breakout room, which was this sort of affirmation, open-ended question reflection sandwich, which is, I see you're a staunch supporter of climate action. How do you see being able to meet the needs of your constituents in places like, of course, Kentucky and West Virginia, whose lives depend on coal, while moving forward on climate? I think this might be sort of double-ended. I'm not sure if this fits your definition.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's very complicated, but it's beautiful. It does include almost all those elements. I like your sandwich metaphor. Very good.
Is that what you would? Is this what you would really call double-sided?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to actually look at that and think about that a little more closely, but I think that you are expressing two sides of this person's concern. Yes, I think you did that.
We came up with the question, how would you protect them while combating climate change?
Very good. Very good.
And
It's interesting.
for an affirmation, you care deeply about working people's jobs and the economy, as well as combating climate change, which threatens all our livelihoods. With it's a blatant ripoff from somebody's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, your question, I just want to say again, is like the double-sided reflection question, which is, I think you just invented that. You know, you folks have invented the double-sided questions. I love that. Someone else want to share? Or do you have something else you want to share?
I want to, my brain, whenever I see a statement like this, gets stuck on the falseness of the actual statement.
Right.
And I don't know how to disengage.
So this is an important.
That doesn't just.
Yeah. So in motivational interviewing, this is called the writing reflex. You know, the writing reflex is when we're off balance, we want to like come back into balance. But in a conversation, you hear something that's false and you want to correct it. And MI calls that the writing reflex, and how we have to inhibit that. It doesn't help just to correct the other person. So it's a really important lesson for all of us to try to refrain from just rebutting what they've said. I would like to share one more final thought before we go to a general Q&A. This is something that Miller and Rolnick said in their book, Motivational Interviewing. Motivational interviewing is a method of communication rather than a set of techniques. It is not a bag of tricks for getting people to do what they don't want to do. It is not something that one does to people. Rather, it is fundamentally a way of being with and for people, a facilitative approach to communication that evokes natural change. And now we'll take a few minutes to answer questions that you may have about anything in the presentation today. So I'm going to stop the share.
Hi, I mostly wanted to say, boy, I think that last statement was worth the price of admission because I have that same impulse too. When someone makes a, you know, there might even, some of it might even be correct, but then there's some falsehood in there. And I just want to go after that. So knowing that that's not a good idea, I mean, because it isn't a good idea. I should know that from experience. We all know that that does not move the conversation along. It starts the confrontation right there. So thank you. Thank you.
And I want to say too that there are, of course, there are times when it's perfectly appropriate to share information. All of us encountered at some point climate science, and we were motivated to get involved as activists. So, you know, if you have a friend or a family member or a member of Congress who wants information from you, by all means, share the information with them. Motivational interviewing, as I said, was designed to help deal with resistance. So when you encounter the person who is not open to that information, that's when you have to check that writing reflex. Okay, so that's an important signal, knowing when to do what. Another question?
Barbara.
Yes, hi. I'm still struggling with the difference between finding, meaning seeking connection, and the general drift of MI. It feels like finding connection is part of what MI is all about.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite understand the question.
Well, I think when I don't know which zone it is, when it's not optimal,
Yeah.
the find and fawn
Right, this is the yellow zone, right?
is the yellow zone. And I don't understand why finding is a negative when it feels like the whole drift of MI is to validate, which is connecting, to be with somebody.
Right, which is the green zone, right? This is the social engagement zone where we're connected.
Yes.
That's what we're aiming for.
Yes. So how is find in the yellow zone, not in the green zone?
Tamara, you want to take that question?
Yeah, so and that's a great question, Barbara. And it's one of those nuanced things. It's like being able to, in a sense, knowing the difference between where your nervous system is in green and in a place where you are able to socially connect, able to connect with that other person and feel at peace, curious, like true curiosity. When you're in the find and the fawn place, and again, the way that I've understood it is that find and fawn place is sort of in the edge between, it's in the lime green zone in a sense, or in the maybe that zone between social engagement and fight or flight, where you're trying to get back to green. Like, what is it? Get myself back to green. Mm-hmm. So it is this nuanced space of like, am I just saying things to appease this person, which is fine. Sometimes that's the thing that needs to be done, right? To help the conversation, to help that other person's nervous system, to help our nervous system. And it is this nuanced place, but find and fawn is really more of, it's less authentic is what I would say. Yeah. Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry we don't have time for more questions right now. We do want to share with you some resources for continued study. Tamara, you want to take this slide first?
Yeah, I would love to. So thank you, John, for all of that. It's really powerful to be able to put all of this together as committed climate advocates and friends. And if you found any of the links that we've shared useful tonight, well, first of all, I just want to say, to start with, that to access the recording of this workshop, because there was a lot here, you might want to watch it again or share it with some of your network. You can access that after about 2 days, and that's cclusa.org/presentations. If you found any of the links shared useful tonight and want to save the chat as a text file on your computer, you can click in your chat window right now in Zoom and move your mouse over to the triple dot ellipsis button seen at the top of the screen and click it. And from the drop-down menu, click Save Chat and look for the text file where your computer saves downloads from the internet. Or right when you close Zoom, it should open. As we've mentioned, we put together a resource page to deepen your understanding and exploration of these topics, including a link to this Google slide presentation with speaker notes in it. And we'll go ahead and put that link in the chat right now for that resource document. But more importantly, know that that resource document can be found on the CCL Resilience Hub on the right-hand side under support material. It will also live on the new resilience resource page, which is also listed on the hub, which brings me to the hub. The CCL Resilience Hub is a very exciting place for all of us, really. It's a one-stop spot for all things resilience within CCL, including a video about what resilience is, live workshops, recorded and online trainings, and even practices and links to relevant action teams like the Resilience Building Action Team. CCL Resilience Hub is easily accessible with this short link, which John will pop into the chat, as he already did. I see cclusa.org/resilience. Or you can search resilience in the search bar or see it under the resources and trainings tab at the top of any page on CCL Community. I would like to mention that we have an upcoming Active Hope workshop based on the work of the fabulous Joanna Macy this coming Tuesday. People are truly enjoying these workshops, and there may still be space. So you can go to the Resilience Hub to learn more about Active Hope workshops. We also have a Resilience Circle on December 5th, which is a great space to come together to listen and share authentically. And next year, we'll have another round of ONGO, which stands for Ongoing Practice, which is a 12-week program that's a beautiful blend of nonviolent communication techniques and building resilience. As you very well likely know, as a CCL volunteer, all of these are free to you and the people in your lives. John?
Yeah, so thank you, Tamara. Our effective communication action team is sadly not currently active, but that page hosts many videos of past trainings on motivational interviewing. If you would like to help revive the effective communication action team, please be in touch with me. My email address will be on the next slide. Also, keep your eyes out for another intermediate 6-week training in motivational interviewing led by Vince Schutt. I think that may happen as early as January, and that goes much more deeply into all of these concepts. You can also check out the website of Vince's Environmentum group at environmentum.org. If you're very serious about learning this stuff, you can look at Miller and Rolnick's book, Motivational Interviewing. Also, the group Braver Angels uses similar communication approaches, and you can check out Braver Angels themselves, as well as CCL's Braver Angels Action Team. The approach of nonviolent communication has a lot of similarity to motivational interviewing, so you can read about that or go to the website of the Center for Nonviolent Communication. And as Tamara said, our ONGO trainings are a blend of personal resilience training and nonviolent communication. So they're a good next step if you found today's workshop of value. I just want to thank you all for being here today. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you all have too. You've got our email addresses here if you'd like to contact either of us in the future. And that's it. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day and a great lobby week if you're going to be in a lobby meeting. And let's all hope we bring that carbon price home here sometime soon in the near future.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Citizens Climate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.